Hold on. I'm having a technical difficulties this time period, but we gonna get it together. How are you guys? Come on in and listen to the press conference. Screen share, Nolan press conference. Here we go. I just wanted to hear about.
What would transparency look like to you? I know we spoke about transparency during the eulogy. What are you hoping and wanting from investigators?
The truth. I think that we need to hear exactly with evidence of what they say happened. I think that part of what embellished the concerns we had was for someone in law enforcement here to say, we see no foul play. So they're really going to have to show us one way or another where they go from here. The fact is that you cannot convince many of us, given the unanswered questions, cell phones, stuff taken off the cell phone, keys, all of which was at first denied. And no one turned, they did not come to the family. The family started missing him and searching for him. All of that does not add up. So what we would want to see is something that adds up to saying truth, not adds up to just some loosely connected stories.
So y'all put me on the screen, shall you? We had to stop right there. This may have been the most important question probably of the whole press conference. What does transparency look like to you all, right? What does transparency look like? That may have been the most important question asked. Not who killed Nolan Wells. Not do you believe this was murder. Not do you believe this was a hate crime. The first real question was, what does transparency look like? That question matters because it immediately changes the direction of this conversation. Over the last several weeks, social media has been arguing about race. Some people are convinced this case has nothing to do with race. Other people are convinced race explains everything. Everybody seems to have already picked a side. But when Ben Crump stepped to the podium, he didn't start by accusing anybody of murder. He didn't start by accusing law enforcement of a cover-up. He didn't stand there and declare that this was a racial attack. He talked about evidence. He talked about unanswered questions. He talked about transparency. That surprised me. Because if you only follow this story through social media, you would think this entire press conference was one long speech about racism. It wasn't. And that's exactly why we're here today. Some of y'all made up your minds the moment you saw Ben Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton standing beside the Wells family. You didn't wait to hear the facts. You didn't wait to hear the questions. You didn't wait to hear what they were actually asking for. You saw two familiar faces, and immediately y'all said, here we go again, race hustler, blah, 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 and making everything about race. This has become another racial circus. But let me ask you something. How many people criticized this press conference actually watched the entire press conference? Not the 30-second clip on TikTok, not the 15-second reel on Facebook, the whole thing. Because when I sat down and listened to every word, I realized something. The conversation they were having wasn't the same conversation social media was having. Social media was arguing over whether race caused Nolan Wells' death. Ben Crump and Al Sharpton were asking whether race could influence how this investigation is conducted. Those are two completely different questions. One asks whether race caused the tragedy, and the other one asks whether every family deserves the exact same effort, the exact same urgency, and the exact same search for the truth. You don't have to agree with their concerns, but at least understand what they're actually saying before criticizing Ben Crump and Al Sharpton. And here's another thing. Some of y'all get uncomfortable every time Ben Crump or Reverend Al Sharpton walks into a case involving a black family. Why? Because somewhere along the way, their names stopped representing two individual men and started representing something much bigger than that. To some of y'all, they represent accountability. To other people, they represent division. To other people, they represent justice. And to other people, they represent race politics. So the minute they came on camera, people stopped listening. The conversation became about Ben Crump and Al Sharpton instead of the family standing beside them. But here's what I want to do today. I don't want to argue whether Ben Crump is right. I don't want to argue whether Al Sharpton is right. I don't want to argue whether race caused Nolan Wells' death, because none of us knows that today. What I want to do is something much simpler. I want to listen, because if we're going to criticize somebody, let's criticize what they actually said, not what somebody on social media told us they said. And one more thing, just because Ben Crump and Rev and Al Sharpton often represent black families doesn't automatically mean every case they touch is about race. But it also doesn't mean race is an illegitimate question whenever they show up. These two men have spent decades standing beside families who believed they were being heard. Sometimes they were right, sometimes they weren't. But one thing is for sure, they have learned that public attention often forces public accountability. That's why they ask the questions. That's why they demand transparency. That's why they push investigators to explain what they're doing instead of asking the public to simply trust them. And whether you like them or not, transparency should never scare anybody. If investigators did everything correctly, transparency proves it. If witnesses told the truth, transparency will confirm that. If evidence supports the official story, transparency strengthens that. Transparency protects innocent people just as much as it exposes the guilty people. So why would anybody oppose transparency? That's the question I keep asking myself while watching this press conference. Because the more I listened, the less I heard accusations, the more I heard questions. And I think that's an important distinction. So before we talk about Ben Crump, before we talk about Al Sharpton, before we talk about race, let's first answer a simple question. What was said? What was asked? Because I think a whole lot of people are responding to the headlines instead of the actual words. Let me listen to this. Number one. Oh,
the facts were reversed.
listen. I hate
The
when
facts were reversed. I mean, it's inescapable. You know, people often talk about, well, you all keep interjecting race. Well, y'all know in every situation that is a identifier when you're talking about matters. You know, we hear black on black crime. It's inescapable, and so we want to really be able to say to this family, but to America, it was a fair investigation. Everything they did had the roles being reversed racially, where they had 3 young black men and a white man died after being on the boat. You have his cell phone. Those are the things that we're searching for. Did you search their phones? We talking about Nolan's phone. Those are the questions that transparency the autopsy. You know, we waiting for it. It shouldn't take that long. We want those answers. And so transparency is giving complete equity to this family. A fair and thorough, impartial investigation where we know that due process was respected every step of the way.
Okay. And let me play this one video. Play this one.
Transparency look like to you all? I know we spoke about transparency during the eulogy. What are you hoping and wanting from investigators?
The truth. I think that we need to hear exactly by with evidence of what they say happened. I think that part of what embellished the concerns we had was for someone in law enforcement here to say, we see no foul play. So they're really going to have to show us one way or another where they go from here. The fact is that you cannot convince many of us, given the unanswered questions, cell phones, stuff taken off the cell phone, keys, all of which was at first denied. And no one turned, they did not come to the family. The family started missing him and searching for him. All of that does not add up. So what we would want to see is something that adds up to saying truth, not adds up to just some loosely connected stories.
So Reverend Al Sharpton said, y'all keep injecting race. Let's stop right there. This is the part almost nobody on social media wanted to talk about. People heard Reverend Al Sharpton mention race, and they immediately shut down. They said, see, I told you, here we go again. Even on my thumbnail right now, people are afraid to even confront the fact that they feel like it's about race. So they don't want to talk about race. White people don't never want to face the fact that racism is rampant within their community, and black people don't never want to face the fact that it's always going to be there. And it's always going to be a slight tipping of the hand towards white what's it called? Privilege. So people heard Reverend Al Sharpton mention race, and they say, see, I told you, it's always about race. It's always talking about that. But if you actually listen to what he said instead of reacting to his name, you'll notice something. He wasn't saying race caused Nolan's death. He wasn't standing there declaring this was a hate crime. He didn't say that. He wasn't accusing every white person in Mississippi of being racist. That isn't what he said. What he actually said was much more specific. He said people keep acting like bringing up race is somehow inappropriate. His point was simple. America has talked about race in the criminal justice system for generations. Whether you agree with him or not, that's not a new conversation. Race is not a new conversation. It's a conversation that's been happening for decades. So when people say, why are they making this about race? Sharpton's response is essentially this. You're acting like race has never affected the justice system before. Now, maybe you agree with that, maybe you don't. But that's a completely different argument than saying Nolan Wells died because he was black. Those are not the same statements. Unfortunately, a lot of people hear the word race and immediately stop listening. Everything becomes emotional to them. It's emotional response. Everything becomes defensive. I don't want to defend my white race. I'm white, but I don't want to defend it. Nobody hears the rest of the sentence. And that's exactly what happened here. And they do it all the time on my channel. The minute I mention race, they lose their mind like, oh, you're a racist. You're talking about race. Talking about race is not the same thing as being a racist. Please understand that. Y'all get too emotional and too triggered because of it. Sharpton wasn't asking people to convict anybody because of race. He was asking whether race could affect how this family is treated. There's a difference, a huge difference, because investigations aren't just judged by their final conclusion. They're judged by how they get there. Were witnesses interviewed? Were timelines verified? Were electronic devices examined? Were conflicting stories investigated? Were the same standards applied to everybody involved? Those are legitimate questions in any investigation. They don't automatically accuse anybody of wrongdoing. They ask whether the process deserves public confidence. That's why I think so many people misunderstood what Sharpton was saying. He wasn't arguing that race explained everything. He was arguing that race shouldn't be ignored if it has the potential to influence how justice is administered. Now, here's where I want to push this conversation a little further, because I think this is where people become uncomfortable. Sharpton brought up something that many Americans don't like discussing. He essentially asked us to reverse the roles. And that's one of the oldest thought experiments in discussions about equal justice. If Nolan Wells had been a white teenager, if the young people last seen with him had been black, would every decision have unfolded exactly the same way as it did in this case? Would public reaction have been identical? Would the white people be screaming and hollering that those black boys are innocent? Would we have been hearing that same? Because most of the people that you talk to that are white on the other side keep saying, "Oh, y'all just saying it because they're white." Nah, if those would have been 3 black boys that went home without that white boy, would you be still saying the same thing? You, as the white person, need to ask yourself that question. Would you have said the same thing? Would you be saying the same thing if those had been 3 white boys that came home, and the 3 black boys that came home, but there was 1 white boy who didn't? Would you be saying the same thing that you're saying over there on social media, talking about it's not a race thing? Y'all just saying that because he's white. No. Would media coverage have been the same? Would investigators have asked the same question at the same time? I pointed it out last week. I said, at first, those little white boys' faces weren't even blurred out. Now, when you go on social media or the regular TV media outlet, their face is blurred out. Why is their face blurred out? Maybe the answer is yes, and maybe the answer is no. But that's the question that Al Sharpton is asking. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say it definitely would have been different. He challenged people to think about it. I'm challenging you all to think about it. If those had been 3 black boys come home, would you be saying the same shit y'all saying now? It's also about whether the public believes everybody receives equal treatment under the law. That's why trust matters. Law enforcement depends on public trust. Courts depend on public trust. Jurors depend on public trust. If the public loses confidence in process, every decision becomes suspect, even when investigators do everything correctly. That's why transparency matters so much. And that's why Al Sharpton kept returning to fairness instead of conclusions. But let me address another criticism I've seen people say. Why does everything involving black people have to become about race? My answer is another question. Did Sharpton make the entire press conference about race? Or did he spend most of his time talking about fairness? Go back and listen. You'll hear him talk about justice, equal treatment, accountability, talking about making sure the family receives the same diligence any family deserves. That's not the same thing as saying race explains every unanswered question. Sometimes race is the accusation. Sometimes race is simply part of the context people are evaluating. Those aren't interchangeable. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we pretend they are. Now, does that mean every concern raised by Ben Crump or Reverend Al Sharpton is automatically valid? No. They can be questioned just like everybody else. Their arguments should stand or fall based on the evidence. Not because of who they are, not because some people admire them, not because other people dislike them. Judge the argument, not the messenger. Because here's the danger. The minute we stop listening to somebody's actual words and start responding only to their reputation, we've stopped having an honest conversation. I have seen a lot of people online. Oh, Reverend Al Sharpton is involved. Degeneracy, fuckery, race hustling, race baiting. You do people a disservice. You do this family a disservice when you do that. You're not having an honest conversation. You replace evidence with assumptions. You replace listening with labels. And once that happens, nobody learns anything. So before this press conference moves another inch, before anybody decides Ben Crump is right, anybody decide whether Reverend Al Sharpton is wrong, let's keep doing what they repeatedly ask everybody else to do. Slow down, examine the facts, ask questions. And let's make sure that whatever conclusion they eventually reach is built on evidence, not assumptions. They haven't went to the grand jury yet. They want to have a strong case before they go to the grand jury. If there's a strong case, okay, it has to be strong enough to withstand questions. If the investigation is solid, questions won't weaken it. They'll strengthen confidence in it. And if they have weaknesses in the questions, the weaknesses will be discovered. That's not being anti-police or anti-white or pro-black. That's being pro-truth. And I don't think anybody should be afraid of the truth. But if that's true, then the question is, why did the Wells family keep returning to one word over and over again? Not racism, not guilt, not prosecution. They kept saying transparency. Okay? Transparency. Let me show this video right here. Ben Crump.
Well, hope that they would give the same to us.
Attorney Crump, we talked before about situations like this, and I'm just wondering, does it bother you a little bit that we don't have that news conference where officials are given a timeline, where they map things out for what they know, where they share as much information as they have with the public? Because obviously people are paying attention.
Yeah, you know, Ryan, it's always troublesome to all of us when these investigations just take forever. I mean, 6 months to get a toxicology report back, to get an autopsy done, as if, you know, the longer we let it go, the more people forget other things happen. It gets swept under the rug. And so that's what's important, to have a timeline. And when you don't have that timeline, you start to say, oh, what Nolan Wells, what happened? I mean, I remember that case, but we got no answers. And so that's the trouble without having a timeline. And so that's why the people who are calling us, I mean, we have people presenting videos, and it's so helpful as we try to put this puzzle together. People are talking about their boats, and when they were out there, and when they were in earshot of Nolan and people on the boat. We need all of that information because we want to make sure what goes to the grand jury is accurate. Right. We know when it goes to the grand jury, we never will know what happened in that grand jury. That's why we're collecting affidavits. Did this get presented to the grand jury? It's never lost on me. It's never lost on me. You can get an indictment on a ham sandwich in the grand jury if you want to. Mm-hmm. The question is, are you trying to get to the truth? Or are you trying to help keep the truth hidden from us?
Okay. So, did you notice something though? Ben Crump could have stood at the podium and spent 20 minutes accusing people. He didn't do that. He could have declared somebody guilty. He didn't do that. He could have demanded arrest. He didn't do that. Instead, he kept coming back to one word, transparency. That tells me something, because transparency is not the same thing as demanding a conviction. Transparency isn't the same thing as saying investigators are corrupt. Transparency simply means show us how you reached those conclusions. And honestly, I don't know why anybody would be offended by that request. I don't understand why there's a big deal that Ben Crump and Al Sharpton are asking for transparency when it comes to this death. Okay? If the investigation has been thorough, transparency only strengthens it. If every witness has been interviewed, every timeline verified, every phone call examined, every piece of evidence has been collected, then opening that process up to the public scrutiny doesn't hurt law enforcement. It helps them because people stop wondering whether something was missed. Confidence grows when people understand how investigators reach their conclusions. That's why I think this conversation is bigger than Nolan Wells. Every family deserves confidence that the investigation into their loved one's death was complete, not rushed and not careless, complete. Now think about the position the Nolan's family is in. They're grieving. They're trying to understand how a young man who left with friends never came home. A well, able-bodied, in shape athlete died. Like any family in that position, they're replaying every decision in their mind about what happened. They're asking questions investigators may not even have asked yet or answered yet. That's normal and it's human. Families don't just lose somebody and suddenly become satisfied. Because somebody says, trust me. Trust has to be earned, especially in a case where so much public attention surrounds every new development. That's why Crump kept returning to the evidence. Not because evidence guarantees the answers the family wants, because evidence is the only thing that can give them an answer they can live with. And that's a lesson worth remembering, okay? We live in an era where people form opinions before investigators even finish their work. Everybody has an opinion about this. Social media moves faster than facts. Some people decide this was an accident within hours. Some people decide it was murder. Some people decide it was a cover-up. Everybody wants clarity. Very few people want patience. But investigators don't work that way. Good investigators don't begin with the conclusion. They begin with the questions. And every answer they find creates another question. That sheriff got his ass on here talking about it looked like a drowning to him. He got his monkey ass on here talking about it looked like a drowning, an accidental drowning. Who are you to get your ass on TV and say something like that? That's why we feel like maybe it's a cover-up. Maybe they're trying to hide something. Maybe they're not coming up with what they're coming up with. That's why the independent autopsy is going to come out after this Mississippi people come out. Because they're going to make sure that this Mississippi autopsy matches the one from that Colin Kaepernick paid for. Okay? Every question is going to be answered by that independent forensics, that examiner in Washington, D.C. Every question is going to be answered and asked and answered by that independent autopsy. That's why Mississippi better get this investigation correct. Okay? They better get it correct. Are the timelines correct? What happened first? Who was present? Who left, stayed, spoke to investigators, didn't? When did each thing occur? Those details may seem boring to people on social media. To investigators, they're everything. The timeline is how stories are tested. If two witnesses describe the same event differently, the timeline often reveals which version fits the physical evidence. That Katie girl said that he left her and went to get on the boat with Nolan, went to get on the boat with his friends. Those kids were taking water on, or something was happening with their boat in the same spot, damn near the same spot that Nolan disappeared in. They said northwest side, was it northwest or northeast? That's where they got picked up. That's where they boat, they called help 911, or they called somebody for help from that particular point on that island where Nolan washed up at. Okay. If electronic records contradict somebody's memory, investigators need to know why. So Katie said that he left to go home with them, and they said no, he didn't. He stayed with Katie. Katie has come forward, and her mother has come forward, and she's been transparent about everything. Even before they investigated her, she was out there in front saying, hey, he was with me for a minute, or he was with me for whatever, but he said he was leaving with his boys. This is an investigation. Same thing applies with the cell phones. People heard Ben Crump mention phones and immediately assumed he was accusing somebody of hiding evidence. That's not necessarily what he was saying. His point was much simpler. If investigators believe Nolan's phone contains information that helps explain what happened, why wouldn't they examine every relevant device connected to the events of that day? Why wouldn't they take all three of those white boys' cell phone? Katie's cell phone, everybody's cell phone? That's a fair question, not a guilt question, because consistency matters. The same investigation standards should apply to everybody connected to the incident. Otherwise, people begin to ask whether investigators look everywhere, or they don't look at all the evidence, only what they want to see. Now they got to go to the grand jury. I've seen people online say, if there was no foul play, why is there a grand jury? That's a fair question. But a grand jury doesn't automatically mean investigators have concluded that somebody committed a crime. A grand jury can be part of determining whether there's enough evidence to support criminal charges. Somebody could have committed a crime. Somebody could have did something, but there was not enough evidence to prove that they did something. That could be the possibility. Okay? That's exactly what transparency remains important in this case, because every additional step in the investigation creates questions from the public. The more questions people have, the more clearly investigators need to be to explain the processes whenever the legalese takes them. Otherwise, speculation fills the silence. Okay? Speculation convinces innocent people that they're guilty. Okay? A YouTube video quotes a tweet, and then it becomes the real deal, or it becomes the truth. That's why evidence matters more than opinions. That's why transparency matters more than rumors. You build justice by collecting facts, one fact at a time, and that's exactly what I heard Ben Crump asking for. No special treatment, no preferential treatment, a complete investigation. On the other hand, this family and the public, to understand how investigators reach whatever conclusion they ultimately reach, whether that conclusion supports the family's suspicions or not. Because here's the truth. Transparency protects everybody. It protects families that feel ignored, protects investigators from accusation. It protects the innocent from false rumors. It protects defendants from wrongful accusations. Transparency isn't something honest people should fear. It's something honest investigators should welcome whenever possible. That's why I think people missed the biggest point of this press conference. They became so focused on the personalities that were there behind the microphone that they stopped listening to the substance of what was being said. Believe us, show the work. That's what Ben Crump said. Show us the work. And honestly, that's a request every family should be able to make. But then Ben Crump said something I think should have changed the entire conversation. He didn't ask people to believe his theory. He said something much more important. We're going wherever the truth takes us. That's what he said. Let's talk about why that may have been the strongest statement made during the entire press conference. Honestly, I wish more people would adopt this mindset, because somewhere along the way, we stopped searching for the truth. Now we search for confirmation. We don't ask what happened to Nolan Wells. We ask, how can we prove I was right about them murdering him? Those are two completely different mindsets. One is driven by curiosity and the other is driven by ego. The first person to declare they solved the case gets the views. The first person to accuse somebody gets the views. First person to come up with a conspiracy gets the engagement. Nobody gets rewarded for saying anything. Saying anything like, I don't know. I'm sorry. But sometimes I don't know yet is the most honest answer you can give. That's why I keep coming back to that detective talking about, oh, I ain't seen nothing that says it's anything other than drowning. So did the governor. The governor said the same thing. Okay? We're going to go where the truth leads us. Read that sentence carefully, because it cuts both ways. If the evidence points towards criminality, follow it. If the evidence points towards negligence, follow that. If the evidence points towards an accident, follow that. If the evidence clears people who've been accused online, then you need to follow that clearance. The truth belongs to itself. And that's where a lot of these conversations fall apart. People become emotionally invested in a particular outcome. Some people want this to be a murder case. Some people want it to be accidental. They want to be vindicated. They don't want to be embarrassed. But evidence don't care what we hope. Evidence doesn't vote. Evidence doesn't care about political party, race, how many followers you got, how simple you tell the story. Sometimes that story confirms our suspicions. Sometimes it destroys them. That's why real investigation can be uncomfortable, because they force us to abandon theories we've gotten attached to. Now, let me ask a difficult question. How many people watching this case are genuinely prepared to accept whatever conclusion the evidence points to? Think about it. If tomorrow investigators produce evidence that completely changed my opinion, would I change my opinion? Or would I spend the next 6 months explaining why the evidence must be wrong? Because that's what happens all the time now. People become so committed to the other side, they stop caring about what's right. That's the difference. Being right is about your pride. Getting it right is about the truth. And if those two things can come to a conflict, the truth always has to win. That's why Ben Crump was talking. That's what Ben Crump was talking about. He wasn't saying follow the theory. He was saying follow the facts. There's a humility in that statement, and I think a lot of people overlook that, because here's the reality: none of us was there. None of us have interviewed anybody. None of us examined every piece of physical evidence. None of us have read every investigative report. We're working with fragments. Okay, fragments. Investigators are supposed to work or look with the whole picture. That's why patience matter. Now, patience doesn't mean blind trust. There's a difference. You can ask somebody, you can ask questions while allowing investigators to do their job. You can demand accountability without pretending you already know the final answer. Nobody knows the final answer. We're waiting on the toxicology report. We're waiting on all those things. Okay? If you ask about race, you're accused of race baiting. Yes. If you don't ask about race, you're accused of ignoring history. We become so busy assigning motives that we rarely stop to examine the facts. That's very, very dangerous. Justice can't function as a football team. It just can't. Okay? I got one or two thoughts on this, but I keep it to myself because I want to get the, I want to get the autopsies back before I have any kind of judgment. Okay? My thing is, you had friends who didn't bring you home. Their friends did not bring you home. That's all I'm saying. And we are awaiting the coroner's report from the state of Mississippi. Then I think Colin Kaepernick is going to present theirs. Okay? We don't know. But see, they belong to the, the mom and dad should know by now. I'm saying the mom and dad should know whether there was a black group of boys that murdered her son. She should know. Because this independent thing should have been back, like, I don't know, a couple of days ago, right? And so should the states. But we don't know what's going on. We have to wait for the facts to come in. We have to wait for the facts. Okay? We just have to wait for the facts. And hopefully, justice is served. If there's justice, hopefully, if it's something else, hopefully these boys come up with a logical explanation for what is going on, for what happened. Let's hope that's the case. We don't know. But we hoping that's the case. Okay? We hoping it wasn't something nefarious and that we would have to explain because it's too embarrassing. I don't know. But we await what they have to say. Because it should be any day now. We should be getting that report. And we should be any day now. We should be getting the one from Colin Kaepernick. But I know what they're doing. They're playing a waiting game with Mississippi. And Mississippi is in your court. So if you guys like my content, please hit the like, share, like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell for when I go live for other things. I will be back tomorrow, I don't know when, with another show. And please be careful out there. That's all I can say. Y'all hit the door, because I'll see you guys in the next video. Okay? Next video.